You're listening to Blockchain 2025. The future is right now. Every week, we explore implications of the technology underpinning cryptocurrencies. Blockchain.
Each episode is a standalone examination of one industry broken into 3 segments. A basic overview, blockchain's disruptive impact, and relevant crypto projects.
Blockchain 2025 is part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Learn about Bitcoin, create a wallet, and buy your first Satoshis all at Bitcoin.com.
All right, we are back at Blockchain 2025. This is Matt Aaron.
And this is Blake Moore.
Blake, have you seen the report this morning? I woke up to it on Forbes, citing a study from Nature.com that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mining will be the tip of the iceberg for the drastic effects of global warming.
I haven't, but I can imagine how that would be a piece that that gets written.
Yeah, and the title of the article is Bitcoin predicted to be the nail in the coffin of climate change. Very piercing title there, because I guess there's like this degrees Celsius rise. And that's like the catastrophic threshold for global warming. And the thesis is that if Bitcoin takes off, there'll be more power usage.
Wow.
We've talked about this a lot, and I think it's important, Blake, because the propaganda usually comes in the form of money laundering, which we've rebutted on a lot of different shows here on the news desk and the podcast network, how it's very minor. It's actually traceable and harder to track than something like the US dollar in briefcases or art, and much smaller than what's done through banks. And then the energy usage, which we found out that a lot of it's clean energy. And this is energy, hydroelectric energy that from dams that would go to waste if it wasn't used. So it's not really additional use. But yeah, man, I think these are going to be the two of the main arguments of cryptocurrency that we're going to have to deal with going forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you, just going back to your first point there about the whole money laundering. And I don't know, it just doesn't really make sense, because ultimately all this can be tracked. If you want to be super transparent about this, you can. And I think there was this whole thing initially with Silk Road and everything being super anonymous. But now, as everyone, and especially governments, are becoming a bit more clued in on what cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is, they're finding out that actually, yeah, they can keep track of this and can find ways to keep you accountable, right?
Yeah, for sure. And just like the headlines, like one of the headers in this article, is there any chance both Bitcoin and the planet can survive? I already touched on the environmental part and how that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But with global warming, which I do believe is real, saying that both Bitcoin and the planet can survive, the main issue here is that the planet's going to be fine. Earth is going to be fine. Maybe human beings will not be, I think people forget that.
Exactly. I think going back to what we were discussing last week as well about Kevin from our team looking at kind of renewable ways of mining, I think people seem to think that the miners are, these kind of evil Chinese miners. There's that funny joke around that. When in fact, most miners are trying to be, environmentally friendly and think about sustainable ways to do this. It's not they're not all evil Chinese miners. Everyone is trying to do this the right way.
Sure. And I don't think the Chinese miners are inherently evil anyway, but yeah.
Right, yeah.
I think this is a nice little segue topic to start the show, because we're going to talk about another thing that's controversial in its own right, and that is stablecoins. This will be a 2-part episode. In the first one, we're just going to talk about the landscape, the lay of the land of stablecoins. And the second one, we're going to talk about the pros and cons for the cryptocurrency ecosystem in the world, and obviously stablecoins are all tracked on a blockchain. And so this will be a 2-part episode from Blockchain 2025.
No, I'm excited to dive into this one. I think especially just even over the last couple of weeks, there has been so many crazy developments in this space, and it really is coming through as a key theme of 2018. So I'm excited to explore this one a little bit more.
Stablecoin is the new black. So let's start out. Stablecoins, man. Blake, in your own words, without any lingo, what is a stablecoin?
So a stablecoin is a cryptocurrency, maybe we'll come back to that later, that is pegged to either traditional collateral or crypto collateral, or algorithmically, which we'll also come back to later. But basically, it's just an asset that's stable. That would be my description of it from a really top line, 1-sentence perspective. What about you, Matt?
Sure. I'm going to take a stab at it as well. I would say that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have very volatile prices. And as of now, comparatively, gold and especially the US dollar are much less volatile. So for spending on a day-to-day basis without too much volatility, stablecoins were created as a cryptocurrency that's pegged to something like the dollar or gold that has less volatility, that can, with the goal being that it can be used more in commerce for those that don't think Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, et cetera, are appropriate for commerce.
Right. And I think the key thing to mention as well is that these have to be backed. So the idea is that a third party could come in and audit any of these coins and, come away from that audit and say, okay, so for every one of these stable coins, there's one of the collateral that you said was backing it as well and pegged to it. I think that's key as well.
That's correct. And we'll get into Tether in a bit, but think of these stable coins as, different cryptocurrencies that you can trade in and out of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and digitally move them across the world. All the advantages of a cryptocurrency, very fast and cheap. In a couple of seconds, you can move $10 million of a stable coin I can send from, my phone to Blake's phone. So it has that advantage. Whereas we'll say the assets that are backing them, if it's dollar backed, I can't just send $10 million right now to Blake, assuming I actually had that type of money. Only Blake has that type of cash laying around the Airbnb.
Definitely. I'll just go into my bed and pull out that 10 mil right now. In stable coins, we'll find them somehow.
For sure. And so, as you can see, I think both Blake and I have our reservations about stablecoins, but I also do see some use cases for it. But yeah, so I think we've covered what is a stablecoin. But let's talk about the three types of stablecoins in a little bit more depth, right?
How do you prefer your crypto news? If it's through your headphones, then you'll love this podcast. This Week in Bitcoin is an easy to digest news summary published every Friday with a length of 15 minutes or less. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network.
So we have three different types of stablecoins. The first one is traditional collateral, whether that's an asset like gold, meaning, Digix DAO has their DGX token. Each token, DGX, is backed by 1 gram of gold that's physically stored in a vault in Singapore. Or it can be fiat backed by the US dollar or the euro, USDT Tether, or True USD. Each token is worth and should be redeemable for $1. That's traditional collateral.
So then the second type of stablecoin is the crypto collateral stablecoin. So for example, MakerDAO, that uses a system of smart contracts built on Ethereum and basically regulates the price of DAI and therefore the value of DAI. We can dive into this a little bit more. This is just really top level. As you can tell, it's pretty complex, but these are the ones that are backed by crypto collateral.
And this is the perfect time to bring in that stablecoins are so new and we're all kind of figuring it out, Blake and myself as well. But yeah, and so the MakerDAO is the company behind it, the organization behind it, and DAI is the name of their token. And so it's using Ether as collateral and some type of debt positions to try to keep the price constant to the dollar. And then there's the third type,
right?
Algorithmic backed stablecoins, which uses an algorithm, based on the amount of volume of, buying and selling of the cryptocurrency and supply and demand for it that aims to keep it, whether it's burning tokens or creating new tokens, keep it pegged to the dollar or whatever asset they choose to mirror using algorithm and mathematics.
Right. And I think the key part about the algorithmic backed stablecoins is that algorithm can be super varied. So each one's different. When you're looking at algorithmic backed stablecoins, there are so many variables. Where you're looking at the traditional ones, which we mentioned earlier, they're kind of one for one, whereas algorithmically, you can be backing that against several different factors, which makes it very, very complex, but also interesting and possibly the best option, but we'll come to that later.
For sure. So we've talked about, what is a stablecoin, the different types of stablecoins on a high level. Stablecoins, and this is from a report from blockchain.com. They did an excellent report, which helped form parts of our interview. Over $350 million raised to date, 45 projects fighting to be the stablecoin of choice. And I think there's actually more. I can think of a couple like Zorin, which is backed on gold, and a couple others. But, in the 50s, probably closer to 100, I think, when it's all said and done by the end of the year or next year. The main point here is a lot of money and time and projects. People see stablecoins as a use case. Are that many companies want a stablecoin? Coinbase just added a stablecoin. There's got to be a use case, right? And so my question for you, Blake, is why are companies rolling them out?
Right. So I think there are definitely a few reasons for that. So you just have to think about it from kind of a volatility perspective. So as we all know, volatility, in crypto, it can go up and down so much. I mean, right now we seem to have been going sideways a lot, but it does go up and down a lot and has been known to kind of, for want of a better word, go parabolic. So it's really difficult to have that stability if you're a trader in particular and be able to cash in and out. So stablecoins on one side, say you're trading and you see the prices dropping and you want to be able to protect your cash or, your cryptocurrency that you're trading with, you can literally just then trade that for a stablecoin. And you've retained that value if the stablecoin is as legitimate as it's supposed to be. And cryptocurrencies, as we know, work extremely fast, way faster than fiat currencies tend to work and traditional banking works. So why not be mirroring traditional fiat in a stablecoin, but having an asset that can be moved around really, really fast?
Sure. In other words, could it be a better version of fiat, which I'm sure some Bitcoin enthusiasts are just cringing by me saying that on Bitcoin.com podcast, but we'll explain that. But I also think of a trader. Let's just say I have, $10,000 worth of Bitcoin and I want to get out of it, but I also want to quickly be able to move it to another exchange. If I cash out that Bitcoin to US dollars and then I want to remove US dollars from one exchange to my bank account to another exchange, that's going to take a long time and it might be stopped. Whereas if I just change it into a stablecoin, I can instantly send that to another exchange.
Right. And then there are a ton of use cases now as well, like with settlement, like people are seeing the value of cryptocurrency as like a settlement layer and between banks, and stablecoins might be an interesting way for that to bridge the gap there and make that a bit more seamless right now.
For sure. I think another pretty interesting thing is on the Humans of Bitcoin podcast that went live today in India and some developing countries, India, where 83% of people do not have a bank account, they have a peer-to-peer service for buying and selling cryptocurrencies, like a local Bitcoins on WazirX is the name of the exchange. Mm-hmm. And on their peer-to-peer exchange, they only go between the Indian rupee and Tether. And I asked them why. Why don't you accept Bitcoin? I was like, well, a lot of people are only buying $2 worth or $5 worth. And so for a lot of smaller amounts, and in general, even if it's bigger amounts, there's a lot of volatility with Bitcoin and people might be agreed to, and they might take them, 6 hours to go deposit that money in someone's bank account, right? And it could go down 10%.
Yeah.
And so that volatility, some people can't handle. And I think on smaller businesses that there are, on a commerce side, there is a use case for it.
Right. For sure. And just going back to personal experience with this, I've actually experienced that firsthand. So working at Bitcoin.com, many of you surely know we get paid in Bitcoin Cash. And I actually jumped on a flight once, a 10-hour flight, and I got paid 2 hours into the flight. And I lost like 10% of my paycheck by the time we'd landed. And it was just crazy to see that. But luckily for me, it didn't affect me a ton and I was able to sort it out. But yeah, if you're in a developing country and those couple of dollars, the difference between your family eating on that day or not, then you can see how this is like this needs to be addressed and there needs to be some stability, right?
For sure. And I think that's a compelling use case. And we're going to talk on the second part about that. There are ways to protect it, to hedge against that, but that's a fair use case. Another thing that I saw brought up, I believe this was in the blockchain.com research report, smart insurance. And this is another really interesting thing. Smart travel insurance. So there's a lot of times your flight's delayed or canceled. You can get reimbursed for this. But apparently, I think 600,000 passengers a year do not file the insurance claims for delayed, canceled flights because it's a pain in the butt to call the airline, send them email, send them proof and evidence. And maybe with, on Bitcoin, it wouldn't be appropriate because, as you said, the value could be worth way different by the time you fly, by the time you get the money. But a smart travel insurance that automatically pays you. So you're buying flights, you're buying hotels or whatever it is. And if they had a software application that automatically gave you the money, so you wouldn't have to worry about it. And like they're saying, a delayed canceled flight is a public record, right? So there could be a smart contract where the application says, did flight AA 420 get delayed more than 30 minutes?
Wow.
If the time is above X, then, reimburse X passenger with this token. And so that's really interesting to me because claims processes are so painful. I remember when, with rental cars, getting money back, kind of slightly embarrassing, but a weird thing happened like here in Spain. Somehow I got fleas on a person, no dogs around. And I was getting all these flea bites. And so I was like, I hope this is not bed bugs. I had a doctor come to, based on my really good insurance that I have for another couple months, come to my Airbnb. And I was like, do I have bed bugs? They said, no, Matt, you have fleas. And so, I had to go wash everything and take care of all that. But they also gave me some meds to take for a couple days, just kind of some cream for the bites and antihistamine.
Yeah.
And it was 13 euros, right? Which is not a ton of money, right? But I realized, man, to file this claim with the photocopies of the receipt from the pharmacy, scanning that, filling out the report, and sending that to the Colombian insurance company to get 13 euros credited to a Colombian bank account. Dude, that was not worth my time.
Yeah.
I just felt like a pain in my stomach. I was like, I'm just not doing that. Like my body told me, don't do that. But if it was a smart contract, hey, I could definitely use those 13 euros.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. If this was all automated, I've had similar cases in the past as well. Like insurance claims, anything that's kind of below $100, sometimes you just think, well, if this is going to take me if I'm going to have to spend a few hours filling out these forms, is it really worth your time? There's kind of there's a cutoff, right? But no, I totally agree. That's really interesting. I'm sure though that those airlines, and I don't know how happy they'd be about that being automated, but I guess it's kind of you holding them accountable for what they're there for, right?
I mean, it's free market competition is the only way that they're going to do it. Or maybe something like Southwest or JetBlue will start and then others will follow.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that brings a good point. I mean, I think stablecoins is smart contracts for a lot of businesses make their margins or survive or make extra profit because they understand, the rebates that you get when you get a warranty for free $20. Most people are not going to fill them out because it's a hassle. But if you were able to make it automatic based on smart contracts, that would really change the game.
Right. And like we've said before, the stablecoins, they're an easy way to enter the cryptocurrency space and be doing something on the blockchain. Just because that pegged aspect makes it less scary, right? And I just think it just makes things way more seamless for businesses entering the space.
For sure. And going back to the history, which we usually do at the beginning of the show, but this is a special episode, Blake. I mean, the history of quote unquote stablecoins, as we've seen, the US dollar or fiat currency as we know it, it's since 1971 that there was no peg, that US dollar was just print and backed on trust. Before that, it was backed by gold.
Right.
And so ironically, and this will kind of lead into part two, is there's never really been a quote unquote stable coin. I mean, gold's been quite volatile as well. But the irony is that there are no stable coins. All fiat currencies in history have gone to zero.
Right. It's and especially when you look at the kind of current climate, political climate and economic climate of the world, like take Venezuela, for example, they have insane inflation and they're trying to kind of pull together this petro solution. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of Venezuela super in depth. And I know you probably know more about this than I do, Matt, but you have to just see Venezuela as a kind of example of how fiat currencies are failing.
Yeah, and it's happened all over South America in the 90s and 2000s, Asia in the 80s, Africa, all the time up until today, right? And we see the US dollar as quote unquote stable, but everything's stable until it's not. And you can apply that to maybe algorithm stable coins as well. Mm-hmm. Ryan Selkis of Masari and CoinDesk talked about that. But I think that's the great way to conclude this. These stable coins are centralized, right, by private companies with usually real world assets or an algorithm. And it's quite different than the original point of cryptocurrencies of being decentralized and unable for governments to access them, as we've seen with Tether so far, that these stablecoins can be controlled. And that's not to say there won't be a stablecoin in the future. And I think Maker DAO might be an example that aren't. But as a whole, they're much more centralized than, we'll say, quote unquote, traditional cryptocurrencies.
I agree. And I think as well, you have to just see how divisive this is being in the cryptocurrency community. That there are so many key people coming out on Twitter and all over Reddit who have pretty contrasting opinions. Some people think, this is okay. Some people think it's a terrible thing. But yeah, we can dive into that more in part two. But there are definitely some divided opinions in the community.
For sure. Well, stay tuned for part two next week. Yeah, Blake and I will go down and dirty on how we really feel about stablecoins.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. To learn more about our shows, visit Bitcoin.com/podcast. Bitcoin.com podcast network.